One thing I struggle with is like the fake champion, right? It's like there's this end user who says, promises you the world and they're like, we'll help you get into the organization, but they don't really have a lot of sway. And I'm curious, like, how do you deal with that dynamic? How do you approach with multi-threading and making sure you're talking to like the right person at the company, at the customer side of things?
Yeah, this is a great one. This is an age-old problem, and there are different sales methodologies that and ways to characterize this. One that stuck with me is this idea of champions versus coaches. Both are valuable, but one is going to get you farther across a deal, and identifying who's who early is so important. So one of the concepts that we really preach on our team is kind of testing your champions early. It's one thing to ask the question, "Do you have buying authority?" and a more artful version than that, but to actually test and see through functional validation, through technical validation, through talking through, hey, what past vendors have been successful here? What are behaviors they saw? Like, how did you shepherd them through? You start to like get a sense of, is this somebody who can actually sort of like drive me forward, or do I have to figure out another area of the company to multi-thread into? And man, I cannot emphasize the importance of testing your champions early and trying to validate because the risk you run, particularly in a tough macroeconomic environment like 2023, is you spend a couple months on a deal that you think is going to get you to your number. And it's just a lot of wasted calories on something that pushes or ultimately doesn't close last because the person that you're dependent on or group of people you're dependent on can't ultimately get you to. The one other thing that has been emphasized in recent months is you really want to get a sense of your prospect's business model and how they make money, profit margins. And this is easier to do when you're selling to publicly traded companies where you can go into different reports that are filed. But if you can get a sense of, is this a business model that appears to be growing, that appears to be viable, you can have a higher level of confidence in those deals closing because dollars maybe aren't as hard won. In businesses that are suffering outsized right now, you run the risk of just a new CFO or a new initiative coming in. Even if you have the right buyer, spending freezes just happen overnight. And so like trying to go through your pipeline and fine tune comb and say like, this is a business that's growing. This is a business where it's not easy money versus hard money, but you're not going to be under the same level of rigor if you're in a business that's thriving versus a business that's going through a tougher patch.
And you touched on the macro and how things are a little bit different now in 2023. I guess and you have the benefit of perspective, right? You've been doing this for a while and we're here in the good times and in the zero interest rate environment, right? And I'm curious, like, are there other trends you're seeing in what makes, selling now different than, like the early days of Intercom or even before that?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I first joined Box, it was coming off of a really tough macro with the 2008, 2009 financial slowdown and just trying to get back. And so one of the things that at the time felt like a real challenge, but when I look back on it, I'm very thankful for, was business cases were hard won, deals were hard won, and ROI was a part of every conversation, hard stop. I think that in a tough macro, the idea of ROI, it's always important, but it is so important to establish early to understand how does your service make or save someone money, and then being able to flesh that out early, come to mutual agreement, and then every single conversation, touch point, and technical validation that you do has to map back to that why and sort of the how do we make or save you money. I talked to a CRO who had sold his company service to a FANG type company a year ago, and it was 100K deal. It required 2 signatures, and it was a relatively fast deal cycle. This year, to renew it at the exact same level after a relatively successful first year, it required 17 signatures.
Jeez.
And so just little things like that, how many people are involved in the buying process and what's the level of scrutiny over each dollar. It's a small anecdote to me, but it's just a reminder of like every single thing you can do to run a tighter sales process and to harken back to a strong ROI case is the best way to safeguard yourself away from losing deals, missing targets, etc.
How do you think about building that ROI case? Because like when I've tried to do this in the past, it feels like I'm always, I don't know, I'm building some ROI calculator in like an Excel Google sheet and making up these metrics and stuff. And what's always hard about it is like I don't know their business that well. I don't have, how much their sales reps cost. And so I don't know, what's this balance between like, yeah, how do you do that? Like, do you just make up numbers? Do you ask them for inputs? Like, what do you think is like the best way to sort of build that ROI case?
It's easier to do in some spaces and some industries than others. And I think that the key, particularly when you're in a newish space or you're taking a new approach where ROI isn't just generally accepted, is that really collaborative feedback and making sure that you get mutual agreement, mutual buy-in at every step. If you can get to the space of saying, hey, I'm going to save you 100 developer hours per month. From what I see, you have 20 developers on LinkedIn. I'm ballparking what their annual salaries are. Based on what you told me before, it sounds like you're spending X number of hours working on these projects. Is this accurate? And at some point, if you're taking those thoughtful approaches and you're getting really collaborative, people will share, like, this is a real problem I'm feeling, things like that. And then they can also say, I don't think 100 is real. Maybe you can only save me 50, like, but the key is if you're going through that ROI calculator, if you're just depending on the ROI calculator that somebody puts on a marketing website with a bunch of inputs, I think that is usually met with a level of skepticism where if you can go through that mutual validation process, you're a little bit more likely to come out with something that is defensible.
Very interesting.